I have one real quick sales slide and then I'm done. Everything that Riot does is really made possible by a whole community of different sponsor companies, and I'm not going to go into those, but have to show their logos at least once in every presentation. But what we're here today to talk about, as Chris introduced, is this thing called the Internet of Things. I assume everyone here knows what IoT is, or at least has heard the buzzword. Yes? A lot of head nods, that's good. We kind of think about, the third industrial revolution, kind of put electricity and power into every object. What the Internet of Things is really doing is putting intelligence into every object. So now, all of a sudden, we're going to be connecting things that have never been connected before. They're going to be able to sense information, share that with the other things. We're hoping that all of these connected devices don't start to act like Ron Burgundy. But we do think this IoT thing is a really big deal. It's going to create billions and billions of dollars of revenue. There are lots and lots of different predictions from professional organizations that do this kind of thing. And there's some disagreement in how big the number is, but there's no disagreement that the number is really, really big. And ultimately, it's enabled by advances in sensor technologies and some other kind of tipping points that we're reaching that I'm going to talk about during this talk today. So Riot, as Chris introduced, our goal is we want to have a mindset that this region is kind of to IoT what maybe the Silicon Valley is to software development. That it has that kind of a strength and a brand that we are developing these technologies, we're advancing the solutions, we're creating the data intelligence, all the things that IoT promises, that people recognize the thought leadership is coming from here, and that if you want to do business in this space, you should come here. If you want to invest in the space, you should invest here. And so what I'm going to try and do today is baseline a little bit about what the Internet of Things is, where did it come from, and why do we actually have this potential to make North Carolina and this area of the country really the kind of leadership, take that leadership role. So let's first baseline with a definition. This isn't perfect, but it's a common definition of what the Internet of Things is. It's basically saying we're going to take these objects and we're going to embed electronics into them, software into them. They're going to have some kind of network connectivity, and importantly, they're going to have sensors. And it's going to enable these objects to collect and exchange data. This first part comes, it's slightly modified, but essentially is what you'd find if you go on Wikipedia, right? And then I've added this second piece, which I think is really, really important, which is, in many cases, the Internet of Things is going to allow devices to talk to each other without us necessarily being in the way. And for many applications, that's a good thing. It's not as scary maybe as it sounds. Another term for IoT is CyberPhysical Systems. So if you're working particularly in the government or academic space, military space, same thing, just a different term. So depending on your background, you might use these interchangeably. But where did it come from? So if we go back, does anybody know what the very first connected device is, or at least the claim on the first device that got connected to the internet? Came out of Carnegie Mellon. It was a Coke machine. There were a number of engineering buildings that were kind of clustered together on the campus, as the story's told, that there was just this one single Coke machine. And so folks, when they wanted to go get a beverage, the machine was frequently empty. So somebody said, well, let's put some sensors in this that'll detect if there are bottles of Coke in it. And then also, how long have they been there? Because they knew it took about 40 minutes for the Coke to get cold after it was delivered. And then they hooked that up, and they were using one of these really early stage text, it wasn't a browser, but connections into the network, and they could monitor, yes, there's Coke there, I'm going to go get one. There's a huge history, I won't go off too far on a tangent, but there is a massive history of different people connecting toasters to the internet. I just bring that up because if you're bored later, search for them. There's toasters that predict the weather, there's toasters that power laser etchers and cutters and all kinds of fun stuff. So anyway, where are we now? We're kind of entering this age now where things are starting to get connected, and we're using them to augment our life experiences, or even to have virtual experiences in some sense. These are two different markets. This one, I'll argue that this idea of augmenting how we are living our lives with additional information created from connected devices is where I think most of the power and the revenue from IoT is going to come. The virtual space is kind of cool, and there's really interesting applications in training and public safety and entertainment, of course, for virtual. But most of what we're going to talk today is more on the side of augmented. There's a guy named Mark Weiser, I think that's how you pronounce his name, I'm not actually 100% sure, who worked at Xerox PARC back in the 80s and early 90s. And he said some interesting things that I agree with. He said, the most profound technologies are technologies that disappear. And he also talked about, if you think about virtual reality versus what he called ubiquitous computing or persistent computing, which Internet of Things devices enable, these are devices that can constantly be collecting data, communicating data, making decisions, essentially 24/7. He said, in a virtual space, you think that you take yourself out of your place and you put yourself completely into a software-generated environment. The Internet of Things is going to enable the opposite, which is in your physical space, as you're living your regular life, we're going to reach a point where you don't have to constantly keep looking down at this screen. You're going to be able to have additional information that is improving your quality of life without interference in what you think of as just kind of your natural actions and behaviors. And things like glass and some of these other kind of augmented reality headsets are a step that direction, but still they're not there. They're a little bit distracting. And a lot of the information that is going to improve our quality of life isn't necessarily things that we need to look at or see a dashboard or experience visually. It might be something like the car in front of me hit a slippery spot on the road and it automatically told my car, slow down. Things that I may not even know that ever happened, but it had a potentially profound or even life-saving impact on my journey, as I go through life. So the question is, as we have this kind of promise, where are we? Is this still, early stage research, or are we all the way up the technology readiness level to, we can deploy these systems today? And so I want to talk about a number of tipping points that have us today where I think, if you think of like mobile, the mobile phone revolution, where that was about 20 years ago, which is really exciting. So the first is Moore's Law. Everybody's heard of Moore's Law? Moore's Law is regularly kind of misquoted as computer processing power is going to double every 12 or 18 months, and we're going to have these more and more powerful computers. That's a kind of a result of Moore's Law, but what Moore was actually talking about was area. Essentially, it was you could fit more and more and more transistors into a piece of silicon at this doubling rate every 18 months or so. And as a result, because you could fit more and more density of transistors, you could create more and more powerful machines. But what's really interesting is most Internet of Things applications don't require a great deal of processing power. And therefore, Moore's Law is enabling things to get smaller and smaller, where we've gone from an era of miniaturization. You heard, through the 90s and even maybe earlier than that, this term miniaturization. We were making microcomputers and smaller things. We're really now moving, double click there, to invisibility. And if you have really good eyes, you can read nanotechnology there in the middle of the screen. We're getting to where we can make devices that we can integrate into form factors we've never been able to do before. So we can start to look at creating actually electronics that you could put onto a fiber in a textile, or that you could embed into the body, or that you can do things where I don't have to have a rigid PC board with a piece of plastic enclosure around it or glass. Or you can do really interesting things. You can do things that are bendable, that are stretchable, because we get down to such small material sizes that the material properties themselves change a little bit. And so that's kind of exciting. And some of the nano stuff is still in that research stage as you're thinking about the technology readiness, but a lot of it is starting to be practical, where it can be manufactured at a price that the market's willing to bear. So let's talk a little bit about data. All of these devices are sensing things, they're creating information, massive, massive amounts of data. Can we handle that? This is a chart that shows how expensive it is to sequence the genome. And you can go back, and it was $100 million. Shortly before this, it was, I think when Craig Venter did the first sequencing, it would cost about $1 billion. And today now we're down here at around 1,000. So you're looking at 5 orders of magnitude cost reduction in 15 years. So big data analytics, the ability to take lots and lots of information and crunch it and understand what it means is becoming nearly free. That's really exciting. How about where are you going to store all of this information, right? I just grabbed this the other night off of Google, so I don't know if this is the latest or not, but you start a Gmail account and you get 15 or 30 gigs of memory for free. If you want a huge amount, 30 terabytes of data, it's just a couple $100 a month. Storage is really, really cheap. If you take the estimate of how much memory we have in our brain and multiply that across everyone that lives in Sweden, you could store that for a few $1 billion. That's incredibly cheap, right? So we can process the information, we can store the information. Can we transmit it? These devices have to be connected wirelessly, right? So this is an operator in India, a mobile phone operator. They're offering, according to just a quick search, a gigabyte for about $0.015 of data transfer. Probably at least half the people in this room have mobile phone accounts with unlimited data plans. And of course, we're still paying $50 a month or whatever it is for your base plan. But the point is, particularly in developed countries, but even in developing countries, transmission costs are approaching zero as well, which is really exciting. And then, as I said before, most of these IoT applications don't require that much individual processing, that much individual communication. If I'm looking at monitoring my health, I used to work at NC State for a research center called ASSIST. And ASSIST was developing wearable technologies that would enable you to have constant monitoring of your own health, but doing these at a form factor and a size that was small enough that your body heat powered the device. So you didn't have a battery to recharge, you didn't have a lot of kind of the traditional factors that prevent you from taking a new device and adopting it, right? We wanted something that was so easy to use that like an elderly population that are not technology adopters, that don't know how to pair something with Bluetooth, well, they know how to put their socks on, so we could just build something into their socks and it would measure their health. What's really cool is you can do that with like kilohertz clock speeds. You can do that with tiny amounts of data storage and memory. And you can communicate on very low power through body area networks or very, very small local area networks, and you can reach from the device to a nice gateway like a like a mobile phone, and leverage a lot of what's already out in the market. So, are we ready? I'll argue these tipping points are all here or near, and therefore the opportunity is here to do really, really incredible things, because the market adoption of technologies usually is gated by cost and function, and we have incredible functionality, and the cost problem, these things have scaled to the level where we can do some pretty cool stuff. Questions? I'll pause for a moment. Everything make sense to some degree? Shout out at me if you want. So I promised to talk about North Carolina. So I'll make an argument that to really drive an economy, to drive new markets, new opportunities, there are two really key ingredients. The first is you got to have people. And then you've got to have markets that are willing to spend some money, right? Because we're all in this to make some money at some level. A lot of us might do some volunteer work. We do things just out of the goodness of our heart, but you have to get paid at some level. So you need some kind of a market. Are there markets for these new disruptive technologies and disrupted kind of business models and things? And do we have the right people to then serve those markets? So let's start with the people question. Coming back to the Internet of Things, having some of this flavor to it, particularly for a technical audience, let's start with the thing itself. So let's talk about one edge device. So this edge device might be a sensor on an automobile. It might be the wearable device that I talked about a moment ago. It might be, you know, something that's detecting the environmental conditions in this building to optimize energy efficiency. There are some key components that every device kind of must have in order for it to define itself as a connected thing. It needs to have some kind of sensor that detects whatever it is that you're trying to measure about the environment, where the device is deployed, or at a minimum, it needs to be able to sense its own state, right? It needs to have some level of intelligence, some kind of processing or microcontroller or microprocessor. It needs to be able to communicate wirelessly. And of course, it needs to be able to run itself in some level. Within the total IoT stack, which is going to be not just the edge devices, but also the network with which they're deployed, there also is going to be some level of memory, some level of data storage in most cases. There's decision making, which is the most important thing. The value of these devices comes from the intelligence and the decisions and the actions that can be taken because of the data that you've collected. And generally, while the humans aren't in the loop for every application, we need to be in the loop at some level to see the benefit, right? So there needs to be some kind of feedback. So we're in race country, so I thought using a race example is an interesting way to think about where does that intelligence happen. All these cars, let's think of them as edge nodes. So a NASCAR vehicle has the components I described. It's got wireless radios in it. It's got a battery and an engine. It's got sources of power to run things. It's got lots and lots of different kinds of sensors. You know, it's got your tire pressure sensors and your oil sensors and all these things that used to be just connected to, say, a dashboard for a driver to see, but now they're also connected back to a crew chief who can monitor all that stuff real time. And ultimately, it's connected back to some cloud server. And the decision making that's happening within an IoT system like this can happen at all of these levels. So at what's called the edge, at the car, if there is maybe an immediate detection of a flash in temperature and a drop in oil pressure, the car might shut itself off because those are conditions that might indicate a fire. Might say, you know what, let's not have the latency of taking this all the way to the cloud, doing some study and coming back. There might be just some hard-coded, simple decisions that are made with a very lightweight processor at the edge node. There's also going to be a lot of stuff that's happening locally, say during a race, in the fog. Fog is a term that Cisco coined, so there are other descriptors for it, but essentially what the fog is you've got an aggregated intelligence point where multiple edge nodes, multiple sensors are all coming together at some type of a gateway that has, that is likely still in a local network, but has intelligence and decision-making capability. So here, there's additional algorithms that are saying, based on all of these different sensor inputs, we think we can go 3 more laps before we run out of fuel. Right? Those are the kinds of decisions that might be made here. And then at the cloud, this is the real big data stuff, right? So you collect all this information from all the cars, from all the races over 15 seasons, and you develop your race strategy of where am I going to invest my R&D to get better and better year over year. And some of that decision making could come back in very short term, and some of that decision making could be long term kind of stuff. So again, just some terms. All of this IoT stuff has to be wrapped around privacy and security. So as a they can be addressed many, many different ways, right? But these are kind of givens, but they're worth stating again. At one extreme, you might say, let's say a health application. You don't want somebody to hack your health data. Some of the systems that I'm talking with the companies we engage with about, they say, you know what, we're just going to do all of our decision making for the health case just at the edge, and that data is going to be transient. So it's going to collect information about, say, my heart health. It detects there's a real serious issue. It calls 911. Somebody comes to me, but that data never leaves the sensor on my chest. It doesn't get aggregated later. It doesn't get shared back to Blue Cross later on as they're changing my rates. That data just disappears. It doesn't get stored. So that's one type of security, is don't hold on to it, you can't be hacked. Then all the way through to the really complex algorithms and blockchain and lots of other ways to protect the data itself, to encrypt the data itself, and to control and manage all of the transport points from the edge through to various different types of wireless gateways.
I'm just curious, is there, so if you have something that's monitoring your person, and you see like them from, is there anyone like qualification to do reporting and stuff like that?
There are, yeah, so the question is around, how is information going to be used for things like detecting that crimes have happened, or there are ulterior motives for using data that might be in the public interest. Is that a fair way to say that? And the answer is that's all going to be kind of hashed out through policy, through regulations. I don't think there's a clear answer for where that's going to be. There's lots of debate on should you be able to subpoena that information in a lawsuit type of situation, right? All of the issues right now with mounted body cameras for police, and all of that kind of plays into this whole discussion. I don't think that is figured out yet, and that's for us, collectively to advise and work together on. As far as kind of the mindset that we have from the Riot point of view is, can we enable the technology and enable the things that then we can make decisions based on what is in the best interest of the folks that are trying to make money off of it, and the public interest, and all these different stakeholders, where the decisions are not limited by, well, we're doing this just because we have this technical hurdle we can't get around, so we're making a compromised decision. If we can at least have those discussions in a way that kind of maximizes the flexibility to make the right decision, that's kind of the interest that we have from the Riot organization, is pushing the technologies and the capabilities and those opportunities forward. So, not a perfect answer to your question, but I think that's where it is. So, again, do we have the right kinds of people to do that stuff? Pause, I'm going to come back to that. I argue that we do. In this state, we have an incredible history of technology sector work that's coming from one of the better university systems across the country. There are lots and lots of the kind of established companies, the Ciscos, the IBMs, so on, that have really, really strong presences in the state. But I'll come back to that. Let's talk a little bit about markets. One of the things I think makes North Carolina really unique is the breadth of different things the state is really good at. So here are just a few key markets. This is certainly not exhaustive, but Internet of Things technologies are not that specific to a market, which is really cool. So there might be a really, really, say, high-tech sensor that's developed that can do some type of environmental detection, maybe some kind of gas detection. That can be applied in an agricultural situation, looking at, how do we use that to understand pollution and how it's affecting how plants grow. It could be used in an automotive application, controlling emissions. It could be used in a healthcare application, looking at environmental quality in, say, a surgical setting. It could be used in many, many different applications, kind of horizontally. And almost across the board, all the sensor technologies, the radio technologies, the ultra lightweight microcontroller and kind of silicon semiconductor-based technologies can be horizontally applied, which is really cool. So then that begs to say, the regions that are going to be able to really show market leadership in doing this kind of work are the ones where they can talk to a diverse group of customers and diverse group of markets and show that their application can work across all these areas. That's how companies scale from being a startup to being really, really big, is not just doing one thing, but doing one thing for lots and lots and lots of people. So I just said, well, let's just start at the start of the alphabet. And I promise we're not going to go through the whole alphabet here, but let's just pick an industry and test that. Is North Carolina strong in this area? And so we invented flight, right, out at Kitty Hawk. Aerospace is still a strong industry. There are sites all across the map that are engaging in this. There's really big, important brands that you see that are active in the state. You know, you go next from AE to AU, Automotive, same story. Lots of stuff here, lots of stuff very close to here down in South Carolina as well. Really, really strong region. And so as you go across all of these different kinds of regions, you start to see some cool statistics where we're in the top 10, or in many cases top 5 in lots and lots of different areas. I won't go through all of these things, but you know, historically, of course, we all know about textiles and furniture. Might not know we're 5th in semiconductor manufacturing in the state. Very large in auto. We've got the largest rail system in the US. We have the 2nd largest highway system in the US. So as you start to look at smart vehicles and smart transportation, we have a great market to address right here to prove that out and then take it even larger scale. Huge number of biotech companies in the region. So it's not just, you know, electronics tech, but also biology tech, which is going to be really fundamentally impacted by the ability to sense things at really small scales in ways that you weren't able to sense before with electronic devices. A lot of agricultural stuff, a lot of military applications. It's a low-cost state to work in. So you know, these are the kind of things that you hear from economic developers, right? These are really cool stats, but they're real, which is cool. We've also got a lot of cool startups that are already active in a number of these spaces. And I saw Halo was here sitting somewhere today, which is nice. This is absolutely not an inclusive list. They haven't paid, nobody's paid to have their names up here, but just show some examples that the region has a really nice entrepreneurial start, and we need to amplify and magnify that. So what's really exciting to me is, you know, I'm a 20-year consumer electronics guy turned entrepreneur now. So my background, I'm an engineer, I'm a mechanical engineer who spent my whole life really doing electrical engineering in the corporate space, worked all over the year, or all over the world. And when I started my career, I didn't have the wisdom to recognize it at the time, but when I started my career, the very first digital radios were starting to be deployed into products that could be purchased for under $1,000. And that was important. Digital radio work prior to that really had been university work. It had been funded by the National Science Foundation and by DARPA and all these folks for 20 or 30 years, and there were really cool demonstrations, but still, even you know, the early mobile phones, if anybody remembers the bag phones that came out of the trunk of the car, it was like a car battery with a big corded handset attached to it, right? That was still the state of the art of mobile telephony, and I got into that industry. My first job out of college was working for Ericsson. And when this digital radio chip became practical finally to sell, that happened to happen at the exact same time a little company called Netscape was founded. And so it was kind of the nascent days of the internet not being a military and academic kind of test platform, but something where, oh, there might actually be really interesting applications of this for consumer, for e-commerce, for banking, for lots of different industries. And so in a way that I described the tipping points that I see now leading towards the Internet of Things, I saw those same tipping points 20 years or so ago towards mobile data. And as you know, the phone that we carry around in our pocket or in our purse, I mean, that is our main computer, our main lifeline, our main device. We probably engage with them as much as we engage with our best friends or spouses anymore, right? So the people that were involved in those industries across the state that worked for the Nortels, that worked for the Sonys and the Ericssons and the other folks, they're all largely here. As that industry commoditized, and a lot of these companies, they had grown very large, but then they downsized. Because the quality of life is so good, a lot of that kind of gray hair talent is still in the region, and that's really good. But then there's been this new kind of entrepreneurial movement that has started and taken hold in this area really well, particularly in Charlotte and the Triangle, but also in other regions in the state. Greensboro is very, very strong. You pair some of that kind of wisdom and expertise and network with this kind of new energy, and there's huge opportunity. So don't just believe what I'm saying. Let's look at some kind of independent reporting on the topic as I kind of close out this talk, and then we can have some discussion. So let's start with Forbes. You may have seen some of these. These are all The next few slides are all recent things. This is all 2016 data, some from as recent as just a few weeks ago and some from earlier in the year. But look at their assessment, number 2 best state for business in the country. I didn't take the time to figure out who was number 1, but number 2 is pretty good. There's Raleigh and there's Charlotte right here. Look at the best spots for tech jobs. Really strong. Bloomberg, they looked at what does it take to, how much does it cost to run a 50-person technology company in different places? Charlotte was number 1, Raleigh was number 2. You come down here, San Francisco, that's what, 40% more, something like that. So it's very affordable. So investors, as you may see, investors are starting to get a little bit tired of just investing in Silicon Valley. That still is the king, there's no question. But more and more you're seeing investments come this way. Phononic is one of the companies that I showed there. They've raised $40 or $60 million or something. Most of that's California VC money coming into North Carolina. So we're starting to see the investment community come this way. CBRE is a real estate organization. So they do assessments of real estate development and for what applications is that development happening. And what they're finding is, if I go back, Charlotte was number 1 momentum market for tech-based growth. So really, really cool things happening right here in Charlotte. This is multiple over invested capital. So for investments that are made in this region, are the investors getting payback at, between 2 times payback or more than 10x payback on that investment as companies are exiting? And so this chart, I don't remember all the detail, but I think it was, they looked at companies that had raised a minimum of $500,000, and there were some other criteria of how they got on this chart. But essentially what they were showing was that, here's, again, the Bay Area is down here. If you're, just playing a math game, you'd invest here before you'd invest in a lot of other places, which is cool. This is one of the charts I really like. So this was from back in January. The Atlantic did an analysis of venture capital. And they said, okay, let's start looking first at where is there the most venture capital globally. So they're looking at cities all around the world. Of course, San Francisco was number 1. So here's the total. Excuse me, San Francisco and San Jose are a quarter of the venture money across the entire planet. Right? Now let's look at venture per capita. So you've got a startup. Many of you maybe are working on entrepreneurial things. Where you have a better chance against the other people competing for that same money to actually get the money. If you look at venture on a per capita basis, there's Durham at number 4, Greensboro, number 15 in the world. Right? That really speaks to how strong our state is, and that our state is not just RTP, like a lot of people in the tech sector think about. The Triangle's a great brand that we should continue to leverage, but it's bigger than that. So what do we have to do to actually capitalize? This is kind of the last thing I want to talk about. It's very simple. The first step is you got to participate. So by being here in this room, you're already doing that, which is fantastic. But get out, promote, compete, but support each other as well. Think as a community. If there's something that's really cool that that somebody has done here locally, do something as simple as tweet about it, tell somebody about it, help to keep spreading the word and evangelizing. We really have to embrace diversity. If you look at any kind of scientific or academic studies at the companies that are most successful, the places that are most successful, it's the ones that have a really diverse population, that work well together. This is really, really important. There was a study done, and I don't know what the algorithm is that created these scores. So I think this was a 100-point scale. And they showed, New York was the most diverse city in the US. It was a US-based study. Here we are. Not bad. Better than some other well-known tech areas. So we have some opportunity to do some things, but look at where all this money is made, right? where are the best places to do business? It's the places that are the most diverse. So I think that's a really important thing that we need to continue to support and to embrace. When you think like a region, I see a lot of discussion, and I've lived in Carolina now since '94. There's a lot of competition between Raleigh and Charlotte. You know, each of them want to one-up each other. You hear, the News Observer and the Charlotte Observer all the time. They're saying, Mecklenburg County is a little bit bigger than Wake County is now. And we need to stop that. We need to think as a region. You don't see a lot of press about San Jose saying, God, San Francisco got that latest startup. No, they think as a region. It takes about the same amount of time to drive from one end of San Francisco to San Jose as it does to drive from Raleigh to Charlotte. And I'm not trying to exclude Wilmington or other places, but my point is that's not, we got to find a way to work together, I think. And so that's part of why Riot is making an effort. We were born in the Triangle. I work out of HQ Raleigh, downtown in Raleigh. I live in downtown Raleigh and support that. I want all my kids to settle there, my grandkids to be close by and all that kind of stuff. But we're trying to make an effort to come down here. We're actually taking the Riot message nationally. So we're doing an event in a couple weeks down in Orlando to talk about what we're doing here. We're doing something in Atlanta in January to talk about what we're doing here. So we want to really brand this entire region, and so you'll see us coming back to the area periodically. I said my last slide is again back to the sales pitch. Chris mentioned already, we've got an event next Wednesday night. It's going to be really cool. We'll have 600 or 700 people at this event, over 50 companies exhibiting, a lot of cool demos. We're going to have a NASCAR car come up from Charlotte to spin some donuts on the street. We've shut down a city street, and it's going to spin some donuts, and we're going to project all the data coming off the car on the side of the building. We've got a number of other cool things from big entities like Samsung and IBM and stuff will be exhibiting, and then a whole bunch of startups and a few university students that have done some cool stuff. So a variety of things. We have a developer day and educational activity that's going on in Chapel Hill. Actually, that's wrong. That's going to be at Wake Tech Community College. We're supporting the community college system, December 6th, and then we'll be in Atlanta on the 17th. And we're going to run a ride every month next year. So if you want to know a little bit more about 2017, feel free to come by. But with that, I'll pause and take any questions.
I have a question. You mentioned back that Raleigh, Durham, and Charlotte are two of the top 4 small business tech startups, like a company the size of 50. Is that because there are tax incentives from the state or subsidizations, or what is putting those 2 cities?
So that chart was saying for the population in those cities, is it?
The previous one was a couple back.
I'm sorry. You're talking about right here?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So Forbes does an analysis, and they include in their analysis a number of different factors, but it's some of the things I talked about. So they look at the economic climate in those spots. They look at how much investment capital is in those spots. They look at lifestyle impacting things like how much traffic is there, how much crime is there, how much pollution, things that relate back to quality of life. They look at education levels. So I didn't have a chart here, but there's also been a number of studies that show that we are about the most educated place in the country. I think Raleigh and Durham were number 1 and 2 in PhDs per capita. So it's a kind of a mash of a whole bunch of these different factors that go into whatever the Forbes equation is, and then they spit out that result. Yes.
With health tech being such an important driver of IoT, do you anticipate significant difficulty with HIPAA standards, and do we have any local representatives that you all are already liaison with to kind of help push it forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So in the healthcare space, what I believe is going to happen, and what we're seeing borne out a little bit, is the proving of the technology is going to happen outside of the regulated market. So all of the activity trackers, that people are creating, even traditional healthcare companies, are what I'll call reference data. So your Fitbit tells you some things. Hopefully it changes the behavior. You live healthier, but that's not health data, right? That's probably going to continue for a little while because there still is so much uncertainty around how do you handle privacy, how do you handle security, how do you handle some of the things that are going to lead to HIPAA compliance. There are a lot of folks kind of working behind the scenes to answer those questions. And yes, Riot, one of the roles that Riot takes is to meet with government officials. We were asked, it was last February, the National Science Foundation asked us to hold a workshop. We had about 100 people in to talk about, how should they be road mapping their spend in this area, particularly in healthcare, with the Assist Center at NC State. So there are folks that are looking at how do we do that and how do we standardize around that. I think the reality is what's going to happen is there's too much uncertainty for them to say, okay, here's the standard way that we collect data, that we store data, that we structure it, that we push it into these traditional healthcare management systems. I think instead what's going to happen is this will be the Wild West for a while. A bunch of companies are going to try different things, and then kind of the cream is going to rise to the top, and then the standards will be built around that. But yeah, the health community, they're tracking things very closely, but the issue is liability more than anything else.
Everyone in the tech team here is talking about fintech, right, as being a big opportunity. Do you think there's other industry sectors besides fintech in Charlotte that would be good to explore?
Yeah, so I think that part of the fintech story is real. There are interesting things happening here in the area. Part of it is just people associate Charlotte with banking already, so it's an easy connection for them to say, oh, of course, well, Charlotte would also be great at fintech. I would not limit yourself to that. I think that there's huge opportunity in all these different markets. And so as you look at, there's talent that's here. There needs to be more talent. I'm really excited to see folks like Tech Talent South and other organizations that are trying to create more talent. We need more developers. We need more kind of across the board people working in areas. But look at what are the industries that are big in this area that you can get to customers right away. For folks that are interested or that are familiar with like the lean startup and these kind of techniques, if you have your idea, sculpt enough of it that you can describe your concept, you can show a little bit that it works, and then just get out and talk to folks. And so the easiest markets, I would say, for if you're aspiring to do something in Charlotte, are go talk to the people that are close by. There's a lot of automotive in the area. There's a lot, you got one of the most important airports in the East Coast here. Go talk to them, for transportation. Lots of different opportunities, but get to who you can talk to the most so that you can develop your idea the fastest.
I'm curious about what you think. So you mentioned that there were 4 key areas that were kind of reached a tipping point here to achieve the IoT.
Right.
Now, so the regulatory environment, though, around broadband and wireless and spectrum issues is pretty complex.
Yep.
And specifically at the state level, the regulatory pressure from the state increases the cost, I would argue, on using IoT. Because of the ability for companies like Time Warner Cable to monopolize structure requirements. Do you work with the legislature at all to put pressure against these sorts of regulatory?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's part regulatory and it's part just, there's kind of a more or less a duopoly in wireless right now, right? Yeah. So we approach that from a couple different angles. On the longer term, we're very highly engaged with a 5G initiative. So 5G is kind of still at a research stage. It's about the kind of middle of that technology readiness chart that I showed. The federal government asked the Wireless Research Center in North Carolina, which is actually the nonprofit entity under which Riot operates. So we're a nonprofit under the Wireless Research Center. So they invited us to come up to the White House and to help them to scope a request for proposals for what does wireless need to do to enable all this stuff in the future. And we're working to get awarded in North Carolina a test city. The federal government's going to award 4 test cities across the state for doing early trials of new wireless technologies. And so we think that we have a chance to get that. The government's putting somewhere in the range of $500 million behind this effort. So we're going to try and draw that research money into the state. What that is designed to do is to leverage, we have a really, really strong fiber network in the state. There was an organization called MCNC that was created by the state many, many years ago as Research Triangle Park was being started up to do semiconductor research and other things. And one of the outcomes from MCNC is, and legislative pressure is, there is fiber that runs to every single community college across the state. There are 58 community colleges in North Carolina. And every resident of North Carolina lives within either 30 minutes or 30 miles of one of these sites. The issue is the last mile. How do you get from the end of the fiber actually out to all of these homes, particularly in rural areas? And so the goal of this 5G initiative is to say, well, at all of those edge points of the fiber, you can now get broadband wireless coverage out to these other communities. And the hope would be that that municipalities can play on a level playing field with the big operators in pushing that forward. And we're advocating for, you have to be able to create affordable wireless everywhere in order for this to be successful. Where that goes, I don't know, but we're actively working with the state of North Carolina on that, and we have ties to the federal government as well. On a much more short-term level, one of the cool projects I'll bring up just as an example that the Wireless Center has done, which is really cool, is they've partnered with a couple of school systems out in the eastern part of the state, and they've put essentially just Wi-Fi hotspots on school buses. A lot of these students ride over an hour each way to school and back, and they don't have good internet access at their home, but the educational systems are all moving towards, all your homework's online, you gotta do all that stuff. So at least for that hour while you're on the bus each day, these kids now have high-speed internet access. And so, trying to do those kind of things. The economics of, an AT&T saying, we're gonna serve this tiny community, we have to disrupt that because they're not gonna do that directly. Cool. All right. Well, thanks. I'll hang around for a little bit if other questions come up, but appreciate you being here.